Hi, welcome to day 12 on Lance Code and Create. Today we're going to look at a special thing done in CSS, which is the animations, transitions, and transformations. Have you ever wondered how people are able to achieve things like this on this you see on Apple's website? So look at all this beauty. Look at how the site kind of reacts to your scroll. It kind of interacts with you visually. So look at all this effect. So look at that. Look at this. So you see, so these are things we can actually achieve using animation, CSS transformations and transitions and so on. Although on this website right now they are using libraries a bit advanced. I think they are using GSAP, a library called GSAP, but the basic principles lie on what we call CSS transitions, animations, and transformations. So today we are going to look at how this is done using CSS. So I've built this basic project here to help us see a bit what I'm talking about. So this is an example of things we can achieve on our website. This gives comfort to our users. It allows the users to have this feeling of reality on your application. And also sometimes it reduces the brutal behavior of some of your interfaces and gives it this comfort and allow users to feel more comfortable on your application. So without any hesitation, let's go in and try to reproduce this and see what we need. So to begin, we'll start from the CSS transformations. So that is going to be our starting point. From there, we're going to look at the transitions, and from the transitions, we'll now look at how to achieve animations like this product picture that behaves like a flag right there. So let's see that. So head over to your day 12 folder. So if you don't have it, create it already in your Lance course folder. In my case, I have it. The project we're just previewing right now is this file, and this is the picture I use, which I don't own any copyright for. So I'm going to create a new file, which I'm going to name index, a new text file. So I'm going to name it index.html. Yes. And then I'll open it using my text editor. So the first thing I'm going to do is to bring in my HTML skeleton. Don't forget to add the attribute lang, which is English. Then here we're going to add CSS animation, transitions, and transform. So in here, based on the project we have here, I have used a heading. So all this is in the header tag. So I put all this. So that's the menu and then the heading here in the header tag. So I created a header tag, and then in there I placed the h1 tag, I guess, and then I said CSS transforms. Yes. So next to it I added a list. So I used the list li. So that could be the menu of your website. So I did not add any link, but I just decided to use the plain text. So in our case, we can name it category 1, and then just replicate it up to 2 or 3. So we have 4. So let me make it 4 as well. So once I have that, I went on to add this product stuff. But before we go on, for clarity purposes, I'll just keep this one first, and we'll see what we can do. So I'll save the changes and go and open it with the browser. So this is what we have, the bare HTML code. So if I'm to style it, then I can go ahead in my head, embed some CSS. So I'll use the star tag. Then in there, I can start styling. So the first thing I want to do is to target this heading. So I will say heading and probably this case I'll give it a background color. So let me use tomato. So yes, so we have that. So once we have all this cleared, we have now we can now focus on our content. So what do we want to do? We want to have the category 1, 2, and up to 4 look like blocks, or to look like kind of squares or boxes. So the first thing you can think about is to give them a border of 1 pixel and then solid, and then make it white. So we can now see the various blocks because they are we are using LIs. They are blocks by default, therefore they will stack one on top of the other. So that's why we get this. So to get them to be on the same line, so we have 2 ways or 3 ways. One is we can decide to make them display inline blocks. So we change their display into inline blocks. So if you make them inline, that will be losing their width and height possibilities. But if we make them inline block, they will be inline, and we can still have the possibility of adjusting their width and height. Inline elements, we can't adjust their width and height. So that's the difference there. So by doing that, we can now work on the width and height and so on. Or we can decide to change the display into simply a flex. Then we would change the display flex on the parent rather, which is the UL here, and that will change them into flex. So now we can use the justify content to make space between, and they will be spread throughout the whole thing. So that's this another way. Or the other way too is we can change the display into a grid, and then we decide that okay, we want to have 4 columns. So grid template columns, would say now we want, let's say, 1 fraction for the first column, another fraction for the second column, so it's FR, another fraction for the third, and another fraction for the fourth. So this is like repeating this 4 times. So there's a shortcut if you are using grid. So you do repeat, and you want to repeat one frame 4 times. So you want to repeat 4 times 1 frame. So it's the same. So by doing that, it will now arrange our elements accordingly. So I think I prefer this style. So it actually adjusts their weight and get them closer to each other. So the next thing we want to do is, let me add some padding inside this header, and the padding should be something, let's say 50 pixels, large enough. Then I will center the text to the middle, text I center. So we will have this, and then so once we have that, we can now move on and try to target the, let me even change the text color to white, so that's color to white. Good. So now we can go ahead and increase the spaces inside the boxes, and also where we specify the grid, we can also set the gap between them if you want them to be separated. So let's say a gap of 10 pixels between them. So you see it will now separate them like this, and then we can go ahead and add some padding inside each one of them, or we can set the width and height and so. So let me use padding and make it also 20 pixels of the 4 sides. So top, right, bottom, and left will have 20 pixels of padding. So with this in place now, let's look at the first thing we want to study today, which is the transforms. So CSS transforms. So what is a transformation or transforms? So a transformation is basically changing the shape of something. So let's assume we have this element, which is maybe a heading 1, and we know that the heading 1 lies in a block element, so it is a block element. So it means we could probably change its shape into something like this, or maybe change make it turn around. So we can make it rotate like this, right? So let me make it, let's say like this, ensure that we can also rotate it. It's a transformation. We can also move it from the basic line. So let's say it will move somewhere like this, or we can make it move somewhere, so this up, or we can make it move somewhere down. So all these are various ways of transforming this this basic element. So this is what we call transforms in CSS, and we use the transform keyword to introduce the transformations in the element transform. So the property is transform. Now, when we call the property transform, it has various values depending on the type of transformation we want to achieve. So for example, for the rotation, we use the keyword rotate, and then once we add the keyword rotate, we have to precise in bracket the degree of rotation. Is it 20 degrees of rotation, 30 degrees of rotation, 90 degrees of rotation, or 360? So these are the things we can do. So let's say I write 2 and you write deg or degree. So 2 degrees of rotation there. So let's look at that and see how it actually works in CSS. So where do we want to apply the transform? We want to apply the transform to the LIs. So we are going to add transform, and we're going to say it will rotate 45 degrees. You see, we have it transformed. So that's one good way. So imagine you want to have an application where you have these cards or coupons and you want to display them in a particular fashion. So these transformations can be used. So now in this case, you see that it actually happened immediately as I opened the website. So it means this state will be there all the time. The object will be transformed all the time. It might happen in looking at our project, for example, here. It is not transformed until I pass the mouse on the object. That's when the transformation happens. So if you want that to happen, what we do is we won't put the transform in the now the basic state of the element. We'll add a class we call li, and then we'll add a pseudo class called hover, and then we are saying on mouse over on the li, then we can apply the transformation. So whenever we mouse over on the li's, that's when the transformation will happen, and you can see it happening now. You can see it happening now. So that is like a launcher of the event. It's the launcher of the transformation. We don't just transform, although it's so doable. You can always do that. You transform the object, and the natural state of the object is that transformation. But in our case here, we want to have it on the mouse over. So it is just a choice. Now that's the rotation. What else can we do? What other transformation can we achieve? So we can do what we call translate. A translation is actually moving it from one position to the other position. So we do translate, and then we add the distance at which it should translate. And when we say this, it means it should translate. So let's check that. So you can see. So this is this transformation is a movement on the x-axis. So it moves on the x-axis. When you use translate, it will move horizontally. And when I indicated only 1 unit, if I do 2 units, so that's another 10 pixels. So I'm trying to say not only it will move on the x axis, it should also move on the y axis. So if we refresh our document to check, I did not add the comma, so you can see. So by indicating these 2 units, I'm now saying the 2 directions should have the effect. So it moves it 10 pixels right, and then negative 10 pixels up. So that's the negative is up. So if I do it positive, it is going to make it down. So like this. So these are things we can achieve. So that's the translate. So with the translate, you indicate a distance. If you indicate one distance, it is going to happen on the x-axis, and if you indicate two distances, it's going to happen on the x and y-axis. And you can also use negative numbers. For the x-axis, if you use a negative number, it is going to go left side, and if you use a positive number, it's going to go right side. And with the second number, which is the y-axis, if you use negative number, it is going up, and if you use a positive number, it comes down. So this is a trick with the translate. So what other transformation can we have? So we go ahead, transform. So because of the comment is breaking the code, so I will continue like that, transform. So what transformation can we apply now? The next transformation is the scale. So we can actually increase the scale or reduce the scale of the object. So by default, the scale is at 1. So that's the initial state. So if we refresh and mouse over, nothing really happens. But as soon as I change this number into a different number, a little bit bigger, and you can see this happens. And now you can see where my effect comes from. So you can see. But there's a difference here. Mine actually happens very instantaneously compared to the one we had here. So we'll see that later on once we get to the transitions. So that's basically the transformation. We have a scaling transformation, and you can scale down as well. So let's say scale it to 0.56. So and then you can see how it goes. So in our case, we'll keep the scale to 1.3. So the next transformation we can look at is the screw, or the skew transformation. Skew is like what I was illustrating here. So we can screw it like this. So we use skew, and then we indicate the distance, the degree at which it should be turned. So let's say we make it 30 degrees, 30 degrees. So if you go and refresh, and you can see that happen. So you can use this effect on your website menu, for example, to make it look cool. And people will wondering how you achieve that. So, but with a skew, there's a challenge, which is not only it skews the shape, which is the block, it also skews the content inside. So if you want to avoid the content being skewed, there's a trick you can do, which is to also have a skew applied to the content differently, and that should be the inverse of your basic skew. So that means we have to skew the content inside with negative 30 degrees in our case, for example. So these are hacks we can do to achieve that. So the other thing we have to be conscious of is when it comes to scale, for example, the scale, translate, and so on. Here I said we translate on the x-axis, and here we translate on the y-axis. So if you want to translate only on one axis, you can go ahead and do transform, and then do translate y or x. So that's basically it. By saying x, it's just like you using just one unit here. So the same thing applies to the scale. You can also use scale x or scale y to just scale one side. And the same thing goes with the skew. You can skew x or skew y. So it's all the same. So basically, that's the basics of transformations. So we'll keep this transformation, which is the scale, which matches our goal. So by doing that, we have this. So let me bring in now our next component, which are this product. So I will build the same thing, or what I will do to avoid wasting time, I'll just copy the HTML code from this one and then style it again. So now I can bring the HTML content. So the content is basically, we have a main tag that contains the main content, and then inside the main tag I added a section which contains a heading 2 with the caption product, and then I have a list of products and divs. So every div has a class of product, an image, the caption in heading 3, and then a paragraph. So if I fold this one, we see this next product, the same style, the next product, the same style, the next product, the same style, and then I have something I call a wrapper around it. Remember, if you are to use grid or flex, we need to have a parent. So I wrap them around that parent, which I call the wrapper class. So if we preview the code, so we go back to our project, we preview. So we should have something like this. So now we can use our grid or flex to sort the arrangement. So we'll target. So let's first of all target, let's say the main area. So we say main, the main tag. We'll also give it a background color of gray. Let me make it light gray. Okay, keep it gray. Let's see. Oh, that's too dark. So light. So something like this. Then we can go ahead and target the wrapper, and we say the wrapper should display as a grid. So we use grid. So we now change the grid template columns to 4, since we are having 4 products. So we may repeat 4 times one frame. So this should align our products. So you can see they are all aligned like this. But there's one challenge because of the size of the picture. So the columns get enlarged. So we can go ahead and target the image tag and say that the max width of the image tag should be 100% of its container. It shouldn't go beyond the container. So by doing that, it will fit into the normal size of the grid. So now talking about that, let me add some padding to our main and we'll make it 40 pixels. Good. So that gives it some breathing space. So you can see this is bringing a nice website. Basically, that's how you start a website. So next thing we want to do is give a gap to our elements. So do gap. So we'll still use the 10 pixels gap, and that's it. So we want to have some border around the product. So we know the product are having a class product. Each product has a class product, which is the surrounding of the product. So we go ahead, we add the class product and we add the border to it. And the border is going to be 1 pixel solid, and we use, let's say, gold as color. So this is really not, it's too shiny, so let's use purple. Good, that's visible. And then probably make it, let's say, 4 pixels width. Cool. So this is obvious and it's interesting. So now there's also this issue where the text is too close to the edges, both for the title and then the text here. So I would like to target that. The title is in the heading 3, so it is heading 3. We can specify that we want the heading 3 under the product, so heading 3 under the product tag or under the product class. So we not, otherwise, if we have other heading 3s around the website, it might be affected by specifying that we are actually dealing with the heading 3s in the product class that is more specific. So we are going to say padding. We'll add the padding of, let's say, 10 pixels. Again, let's see that. So it kind of gives it some space. So we are going to do the same thing for the paragraph. So product paragraph, the padding should be 10 pixels. And here you can see I'm repeating myself. So this is what this is an opportunity for us to group the classes. So we can say this, comma, this should have this down, and I don't have to repeat all this. So this goes to the same. So it means, so I forgot the dot here. Good. So it means anytime I apply any modification, it should be applied to both of them. And I can already see that the space between them is too high. That's the vertical space. So I can decide to say for the vertical space, it should be 0. And then we can only affect the left and right. And that is very interesting. And by the way, let me increase it to, let's say, 20, so that it breathes very well. Good. So this looks good. So now, how can we also apply some transformations here? So what I thought of is the picture actually being screwed, moved a little bit on mouse over. So for the mouse over, like we did for the elements and the list, so the category elements, we can do the same thing. So I can decide that when the mouse hovers, let's say the product element itself, that's this element, it happens. Or I can decide to say when the mouse hovers on the image itself. So this is a bit this requires a bit of targeting for the user. But if we target the whole product, it means anywhere on the surface of the product, whenever the mouse is there, the transformation can happen. So in the other project, I use the image. So here I'm going to use the product. So I'm going to say product class, and then I'll add hover. So whenever there's a mouse hover on it, what should happen? We should transform the image. So it means on mouse over, then product image. So mouse over product image. So when the mouse hovers, find the product image, apply the transformation, and the transformation should be screw. And here, how do we want to screw it? In my case, I want it to be screwed in this direction. So that's along the x axis. So screw x and 10 degrees. So let's check that. If I refresh, I think I didn't get it right. So it should be product over image. So there's no need for me to add product again. So on product over, we screw it to 10. We come back to the 10. So yes, so it will screw at 10 degrees. So simple as that. And you can see if I mouse over anywhere on the product card, the screwing happens. So that's as basic as that. So it could also be like do the rotation, rotate, and then I say 360 degrees. So you can see, okay, so this is kind of let me reduce 300. So you see, the reason why the 360 wasn't working is because it happens so quick that it moves the same state and back to the same state. So that's basically it, and we couldn't notice any difference. So the same thing goes. We can do a translate. So we do translate, and in this case, instead of 10 degrees, we do 10 pixels. So you see, it translates. And if we indicate negative, you see, it goes negative left side. So if I do translate Y, then it's going up. So you can see these effects in most websites. You see, it's something cool. So in our case, we'll keep the screw X. Good. That's the effect we want, because we want the product to behave like a flag on mouse over. So you can also imagine at this point we can decide to add a border to the image and say the border should be the same border we use for the product, like this. And here you will see something happen. So by doing that, you see, it gives it this border effect. So here you can see that it kind of jumps because the border wasn't there. As soon as we add the border, it kind of takes up some space. So to avoid that jumping, and these are just additional stuff, you can set the border to 4 pixels solid and then make it transparent. So it will be there, but it won't be visible until the mouse overs. So now the jumping doesn't happen. It's just the coloring we do on mouse over, and that's cool. So that being done, we have the basic principle of transforming our elements using CSS. So far, what we can notice is that the movement is a bit clunky. It's not cool. It's kind of brutal. So can we have this transitional movement like this cool, slow movement? Yes, we can do that by using another principle in CSS called transition. So the transition is the determination of the timing or the calculation of the movement from one state of a CSS property to the next state. So if we take the width property, for example, a width can be set to 100 initially, and then we can now, upon a mouse over, for example, or upon some other events, change the width to 200, just like we are doing with the scrolling. So for example, we transform the object from its natural state to being screwed like this. So these are two states, from this to this. So the transition is actually there to help us determine how that transition happens. Is it going to be slow, fast? Is it going to be linear, or is going to be slow first and end up fast, or start fast and end slow? So this is actually the animation of the movement from one state to another state. That's the transition for you. So to make the transition, we use the transition class as well. So transition property, transition. So for the transition, we have the possibility of determining the duration of the transition. What property are we actually trying to animate? What is it? Is it the change of the width we are trying to animate? Is it the screwness of it, or is it a translation or a scale, or the color of the change of color from green to blue? Is it what a property of the object we are trying to transition, or determine the transition, or affect the transition? So we can determine the delay before the transition happen. We can determine the duration it will happen, how long is that transition going to happen, and so on. So let's give it some examples. Let's try some examples and see. So in our case right now, we say, okay, when there's a mouse over, then when there is a mouse over on the image, we'll screw the image. So we screw the image, we add a border to it. So we can decide to affect that by using a transition. So I'll say transition. So the transition property, let me set transition property. What are we going to affect? So let me start from the transform. We want to affect the transformation of the object, the image. Then the transition duration. How long is that animation going to happen? We are going to take, let's say, 2 seconds. Then we can determine the delay. Is there any delay before the event happens? We will not add any delay, so let's forget that. Then we can now go and add transition timing function. So the timing function is to determine how the movement will happen. Like I said earlier, is it going to start slowly and then end up faster, and vice versa? So there are many ways. So let's keep it linear. So it means the same speed from the beginning to the end. That's what we want. So if I refresh, and we can see that happen. So the screwnet happens, but it goes throughout the timing we set during the transition, which tells it to happen during 2 seconds. So that jumping that was happening now is going to happen throughout 2 seconds. You see, it's going to happen linearly for 2 seconds. That's what this means. So that's one way of using a transformation, a transition. So that's the result we could get by using a transition. So it is very important to keep that in mind. You set the transition property, the duration of the transition, the timing function. So even if you don't set the timing function, it will use a function by default, which is, I think, the linear. So you see, you can set it by default. So by the way, let me keep the border to the 3 pixels. So border picture 3 pixels so that we don't get the jumping effect. Good. So we have that. So now we can also apply the same transition on our menu up here. So, and that is happening. So we take the same thing we have here. Let me bring back the timing and then change this back to 3. So we can take it back to the image. No, that's the li hover. So where we have li hover, yes, it's here. So we have li hover here. We placed it here. So this is a bit broken because of the comments. So we are also going to say that since we are also affecting the transformation here, we have here transform. So this is the property we want to affect. It can be any property, weight, height, and so on. So we just want to use the property we are already affecting. So we do the same thing, and now you can see the effect happen. So this is too slow, so let's use 1 second to achieve that. You can see the same effect happening. So these are the basics in creating these animations and so on. So you can see now the next thing we want to see is what we call animations. So in my example, you can see that not only the slowness happens, I also have the product image waving like a flag as long as I have my mouse on it. So anyway, kind of. So how do we achieve that? We used another CSS thing called animation. So we've seen transformation to change the shape. We've seen transition to give it an animation in a period of time. And then now we want to see what we call animations. So the animation tool goes like the transition. So it has the animation name. So you set a name to the animation or what animation you want to use. So you have to create that animation somewhere. So once you have the animation created, you can set its duration, the delay to, and then the function to use. So in this case, the case of the transition, for example, we did not set a delay. So, but you can still do that with the animations. So I just try to limit the properties so we stick to the basic possible so that you understand the concept. So we want to animate the flag here. So what we are going to do is we use animation delay. We don't want animation duration. Yes, we want it to last, let's say 2 seconds. So animation name, animation name. So let us say flag, we name it flag. So we come up with that name, but it means we have to create that animation. So then the next thing we want to add is the function, the timing function. So animation timing function, which is here. So which function, the same thing we can use is or linear like we had with transitions. So and there are also functions called is in and is out or is in and out. So to say is in, it will start slowly and end up faster. Is out, it will start faster and then slowly end. So this is, and if we say is in and out, it will start slowly and then accelerate and then slow down at the end. So this is actually what we call the animation functions, and it's the same as the transition timing function. So these two things, animation and transitions, are using the same properties and animation functions. So once we have that done, if we try to load our application, mouse over, nothing happens. We only got the transform and the transition, but not the animation. So because we did not create the animation, and how do we create the animation? So this is where the trick starts. So to create an animation, we use what we call in CSS a keyframe. So we use keyframes, and in the keyframes, we kind of determine step by step what will happen whenever this animation is taking place. So we kind of decide step by step what will happen. So we can say from, which is from this moment to the other moment, what happens. So from this to this. So that's what the animation will be. So in this case, for example, from what should happen, we should go from this transformation, and we can transform anything. We can use any property, just like we did with the transitions. We can transition any property the same way we can animate uh, any property. Okay, there are limitations. There are some properties we can't animate or transition. So, but mostly the animatable properties. So we say from this to what? So let's say from this 10 to 0. So it will kind of screw it from 10 degrees down to 0 degrees during 2 seconds by using the easy in and out. So if we reload, okay, yes, it didn't happen simply because I did not indicate the name of the animation in the keyframes. So good. So we reload. Now you can see. So it takes it back and comes. So from 0 it comes back. From 0 it comes back. So there's also something called animation iteration count, which determines how many times that will happen. So let's say it should repeat this 10 times. And if I now mouse over, you can see it will now be doing this same thing 10 times. So I can now kind of trick my stuff. I can now trick my flag. So let's say it will go from 9 to 1 so that it doesn't look too harsh. So you see, I can do that. So here we use what we call from to. So there's also a way of using a percentage of evolution. So which means from the 0%, so we start from 0%. At 0% of the progression of the transformation, what happens? So we want to screw it. We want to screw it at a certain degree, let's say 9. Then we can go ahead again and say, let's say at 50% again, 50%, what happens? So that's halfway of the transformation. What happens? So let's say we move to 5%. We move to 5 degrees. And then at 100%, so you can break it down into very small steps to get to look smooth. So what happens? We can bring it back to 0. Now we can try and see. You see, it actually smoother because we have 3 steps it takes. Good, you see. So when it goes back, so it leaves, let's say 0 to 10. So to 10 here. So let me make it 10. Good. So like this. Good. So instead of it maybe to go completely down, so let me keep it to 3 and see. So basically that's it with CSS transformations, transitions, and animations. This is just an introduction to let you see the possibilities. Take your time, go through these topics, read more, and then practice a lot, and you'll be able to create interesting and fantastic applications or user interfaces using CSS. And if you loved this video, kindly like it, subscribe to our YouTube channel, share with other people, and thank you so much, and see you in the next lesson.